Good afternoon and welcome again. I'm Phil Albert. I'm a member of the Triangle Lawyers chapter, and it's my honor to introduce the next panel. Our panel will discuss navigating the legal community and its politics, drawing on their experiences from firms, law schools, and daily practice. This will include some discussion of whether pressure from clients and young associates affect access to counsel and freedom of thought. We're lucky to have North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Trey Allen here with us today as our moderator. Justice Allen was elected to the Supreme Court just last year and was seated at the beginning of this year and is a Marine Corps veteran. We're also fortunate to have an impressive panel to discuss the topic today. Matthew Leerberg is a partner at Fox Rothschild LLP here in Raleigh and co-chairs the firm's appellate practice group. John Branch is a partner at Nelson, Mullins, Riley, and Scarborbough LLP here in Raleigh and focuses his practice on complex business, employment, and constitutional law matters. Jennifer Dickey is Deputy Chief of Counsel at the U.S. Chamber Litigation Center, which is the litigation arm of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. She has previously clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas and joins us today from Charlotte. Craig Schauer is a litigator with the Dowling firm here in Raleigh. He maintains a wide practice from business matters to regulatory battles to constitutional lawsuits. I'd like to thank each of our panelists for joining us today, as well as our audience, and would like to remind everyone that our speakers are joining us here in their personal capacity. Their opinions are their own and do not reflect opinions or endorsements of the Federalist Society or of their respective employers or clients. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Justice Allen.
Good afternoon, everyone. I feel very lucky to be here. The last time I was at one of these conferences, I was participating in a candidates panel. So it's nice to have made it through that and to be able to join you in this capacity today. I'm excited about this topic. I graduated from law school in 2000, so 23 years ago. My first job in the private sector was at a law firm where the senior partner, one of the founding partners, had been the chair of the state Democratic Party. And then I went from that firm over to Chapel Hill, where I spent almost 10 years. So throughout that time, I was an open, avowed conservative, and I never felt like it harmed me career-wise. But I have had the sense that there's been a shift, a cultural shift over the past decade. You think about like Paul Clement leaving King and Spalding because of his work defending DOMA. You think about maybe at least the reported difficulty that there was getting someone to defend HB2 here. It does seem like there's been a cultural shift. And so I'm delighted to have this group of lawyers to talk with us today about their experiences, or maybe they don't want me to put it that way. They may assume they're not talking about their personal experiences unless they say otherwise. Assume that they're talking about other people. But we are going to have a little discussion today about what it's like now to be in a conservative in the legal profession. But we're going to step back. And we're going to start with a few questions about law school. And I do hope to leave time, that we'll have time at the end for questions from you, maybe testimonials from you. But I have a few questions about folks' law school experiences. And the first is, were there any openly conservative professors at your law schools?
I graduated from UNC in 2004, and absolutely not.
I was about to say, I know the answer to the question then.
I graduated from Duke, and there were a small handful of conservatives.
I graduated from law school so long ago, I don't know that I remember the answer to this question, but I think it was, for the most part, the professors just kind of steered clear or kind of did a both sides type analysis to prepare the students. That was my perception.
Yeah, I graduated from Duke in 2010, and I can think of one professor, Ernie Young, who identified himself as a conservative, but that was about it. But to be honest, I didn't really do a head count while I was there at the time.
Was it your experience that your professors welcomed the expression of conservative viewpoints?
I would say it really depended on the class and the professor. Some professors really enjoyed it, and they almost treat you like the token conservative, and so they would just turn to me and to my colleague who was quite conservative. We always sat next to each other in classes, and she'd be like, okay, now what's the conservative response to that? And then we would sort of explain. But she really generated discussion and enjoyed it. There were some who were less receptive.
Yeah, so my experience really, a conservative versus a liberal dynamic really only played out in con law. And I had a great professor, Neil Siegel, who did a very good job at presenting both sides for the class. And so I don't think there's a need for a conservative to necessarily out themselves, because he's kind of sparked the discussion. So I couldn't say whether or not they were receptive, because the one instance in where I thought it would come into play, the professor did a really good job of kind of covering the field for everyone.
Where it came into play for me was not necessarily in class. When I was in law school, if the professors knew that you were a conservative, we were treated similar to what Jennifer talked about. You were called on for that viewpoint, whether it's con law, crim law, First Amendment. You don't really have a conservative position on secured transactions, but
yes, I do.
Where it came into play, in my experience, was outside of it. We were trying to build the Federalist Society at UNC Law when I was there, and it was a struggle to get anyone on the faculty to be our faculty advisor. And we ended up with a faculty advisor, and not a terribly active faculty advisor, which was probably why we were able to bring in culture to the law school. But it was, we didn't have the support that other groups had. But that's, the way we looked at it, it was never it was challenging, but it wasn't that big of a deal for us, because we looked at it as, the sun shines, water is wet, and we're conservatives at UNC. That was just the way things were.
I had, between college and law school, I had been in the business world for several years. I was one of those kind of go back to law school, second career type folks. Don't be fooled, I'm 75. And as a result, the thing that I remember most distinctly is that I was called on as the token pro-business person in my employment law class. So I had to participate a lot involuntarily, because they'd say, well, Matt was in the business world. What do business people think about this law? And of course, I had many, many opinions about employment law by then. So,
Craig, any thoughts about what it was like more generally, the culture at law school for a conservative?
Yeah, so my law school experience was a little interesting. I don't think I really realized I was a conservative until after my 1L year. And I know you're like, God, that guy's really naive. And that is true. But the reason was, it wasn't until I sat through con law and went through the issues and kind of wrestled with I've heard about abortion, but I haven't really put my thoughts or my faith into action in this case. And so coming out of that, I kind of realized, okay, there's a division on these issues, and I fall on the conservative side. And then going from there, the courses I selected really didn't play into those topics. And so it wasn't really a part of my experience. And full disclosure, I got married in law school, so I wasn't really socializing with a lot of people. I was just trying to make life work. And so my conservative beliefs, I think they were well known among a small group of friends I had, but it really didn't influence my experience at law school and the friends I made, because I just didn't have a lot of friends.
We can't blame conservatism for that.
No, you can't. That's just personality. Yeah.
So was it? Did you get the sense that conservative students had any kind of reluctance to express their views or to be open about their views? For example, do you think that conservative students felt any kind of pressure from other students not to speak out?
So I'd say absolutely. And this, I went to law school a decade ago. And so this was before some of the protests that we've seen now. And even back then, I think you were always, as a conservative, you're always aware that you're in the minority. And so you were very fearful of being identified as that. And there are some outspoken people who disagree with you. And so I think there was a fear to be labeled and maybe treated differently. And so I know of a few instances of friends who went through con law, were known to me to be conservative, and on key issues where I thought they might speak up, they didn't. And afterwards, they're like, I just didn't feel comfortable saying anything. Now, whether or not that fear was justified, I don't know, but it was real and it wasn't unique to that one or two students.
Matthew, did you have a comment on that? You look thoughtful or pensive.
I'm always thoughtful and pensive.
Okay, all right, I got you. So before we move on from law school, do you have any survival tips? I know we have quite a few law students in the audience today. Do you have any survival tips for conservative law students that you care to share? Besides just keep your mouth shut.
Join the Federalist Society.
Join the Federalist Society. There you go. That's good.
Well, I do, there's some laughter about that, but I do think that that's an important point to know that if you are a conservative in law school, you're not alone. There are other people out there that share your beliefs. And even if I had a number of friends in law school who were they would not get into politics at all because they didn't want to be labeled one way or another. And even if you have that belief, knowing that the Federalist Society is out there, that there are groups like that can reflect your views, that you could have a place, I think that is very important. Speaking from my own personal experience at law school, it was to me.
Yeah, I would say I think it's really important to remember that law school is training ground for your future legal career. And so, I always treated it as the next step in my job. And so I didn't take it as much to heart when it was hard, necessarily in law school, because I was really thinking long term, how do I learn the things that will help me have the kind of career that I want to have? Who can I look to as mentors, who are conservative or not? I was a research assistant for two professors in law school, one of whom is definitely not a conservative. And he was wonderful to me. He picked me out from the first year of law school and was like, I would love you to be my research assistant. And he wanted to support me in academia. And he knew I was a conservative. And I think you can find that. And just to remember that it's not all liberal or conservative. There are wonderful mentors who will support you on both sides of the aisle if you're looking for them. And then the Federalist Society is a wonderful example of a place where you can go to network and find people who can maybe help guide you into positions that will be a good fit for you long term in terms of which firms you might want to look at, which judges you might want to look at. I think the hardest thing at law school is just not knowing, not having the network. And so if you don't have a conservative professor who knows conservative judges, it's hard to know who should I even apply to? Do I need to go to the Wikipedia page and pull up who appointed them and kind of guess? It's actually really helpful to sort of meet people who can share that wisdom with you.
Would you? So I had an experience similar to what some of you have said. So we'd be in con law. The professor would articulate a position, and then it would be time for a conservative response, and all eyes would turn to me or to another student in the class. But I always felt like there were many more students who thought the way I did. They just weren't vocal. Do you think, would you encourage conservative law students to speak out, to sort of carry the flag and make their presence known?
I really like Jennifer's comment. Law school is the beginning of your career as a lawyer, right? And that's a great perspective to have. I wish I'd had that perspective more at the time. And I think we'll get into this, Justice Allen, but there are different strategies, right, for how you want to build a legal career, or build, if you're going to be in private practice and business, how you want to build your business, right? Do you want to build your business as someone who is positioning yourself to take cases that have political aspects to them? Or are you going to build a business where, you're a Rorschach test, and you'll take whatever case kind of comes in and kind of never try and double down on any sort of political position at all. I wonder if law school it may not be too early to start thinking about that from kind of a strategic standpoint, how you want to position yourself. Maybe that's a little hard to do, but.
So I wouldn't necessarily encourage people to be out and proud as conservatives. I think it just depends on what they want to do with their career for a lot of the reasons Matthew mentioned. I will say, it's a common topic of conversation amongst some of my friends. Did you write your exams left or right? When you did your blind exams, did you write them like a liberal or did you write them like a conservative? And it's very split amongst my conservative friends. A lot of them wrote them left to get good grades because they were worried they would be penalized if they wrote them Right. And my worst grade in law school, I think I was penalized for writing it right. But, that was the professor.
What did you make? No, I'm kidding.
It was awful. It was actually a professor I knew didn't like me, but it was not in my nature to write it other than how I felt. So I just wrote it. But I think it's good to think about what you would like your career to look like, and you can sort of make your choices about how vocal to be about your conservative views based on that.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on now to some questions about hiring. You've all been hired, at least, and I think pretty much all of you have perhaps been involved in the hiring decisions. So just sort of a general question, how does being a conservative affect a law student's or an attorney's job search, in your view, if at all?
I think it depends on the job you're looking for. If you are applying for clerkships, I think it absolutely affects it. If you're applying, there are certain judges who are looking for, people who share their judicial philosophy, or, I think all judges to some extent are interested in interesting individuals or people who they have a connection with in some sense. But I do think a lot of judges are looking for someone who has a similar judicial philosophy. So I know a lot of conservative judges look for people with Federalist Society on their resume. They want those folks to come clerk for them. So I think that really matters. Obviously, if you're going to a boutique law firm that does a lot of impact litigation on one side or the other, being a conservative will either be a plus or a minus. I think for big law, probably a minus generally. I probably wouldn't be telling people to really fly that flag for big law, but I think it just depends on the firm. It's very, very particularized to the type of job.
So Matthew, you're a big law representative here. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think one of the reasons that I'm fortunate to be on this panel is that I've gotten to be in law firm management, both at a regional firm and now at a national firm. And I've led teams and built teams and done a lot of hiring over the years. So I've given this a lot of thought. And for me, at least, my view is that I'm always trying to build diverse teams. And those diverse teams, I want a diversity of, political views, diversity of geographic views, all of the kinds of diversity, so that I can have a team that can think the way that any given judge or panel thinks, right? I feel pretty strongly that when you are hiring, you need to think about who do you have on your team right now, and is there a viewpoint that's missing? Is there, a younger person from a different generation who we could add, who could understand what social media is, or something like that. So building out a diverse team is something that I've given a lot of thought. I think it's really important. But which way that cuts on this, I think, is, again, it's going to be very firm specific, right? If you're joining a firm that is known for having a particular political bent, then I could see it cutting either way, right? If you're joining let's say a progressive firm that does a lot of representation in political cases on the left, then does that increase your chances of getting hired if you know the person who's hiring is trying to build a diverse team, if they think the way I do? Or is the way I think in the minority? I've been told by some folks that maybe my view is not the majority view of how to build teams, in which case it would be a minus.
I think the first thing that you've got to do is be not just a good lawyer, but an excellent lawyer. Anybody who hires a lawyer based on political belief without, that person being a really top-notch lawyer, I think is doing a disservice to whoever they work with. I kind of come down somewhat with what Matt just said. When we've gone through hiring processes, it's not, somebody's political beliefs weigh far less than, are they a great candidate? Do they play well with others? Are they a law dork? Are they very curious about the law? They want to make this their life. And then how well will they fit within our team? What else can they bring to our team? And that may be where the Federalist Society spot on the resume could come in, but that that's not the only thing there. So it just seems, we all have political beliefs, and that's part of our makeup, but we're professionals. And when we're looking at hiring people at a private practice law firm, you want to make sure that the people that you are bringing on board are going to fit well, both within your team and your business model, and that they're going to do really good legal work.
John, I like one thing you just said. That I do think having the Federalist Society on a resume is a signal. You called it law nerd, but it's a signal of someone who's interested in the law, who's thinks about it in their spare time. And for certain practices, like an appellate practice, for example, you want those folks. You want nerds. You want people who wake up in the middle of the night and think about the law. I'm sure there are practices where that's a minus, but yeah, that it is a signal. When I see that on a resume, I think this person is a big law nerd, and so in a sense, it's a plus.
So Matthew, I was interested in what you said about trying to build a team that is diverse in terms of perspective, because we have a diverse bench, and it put me in mind of a brief in a case that we received not too long ago from the Solicitor General, and there was a very in-depth argument, originalist argument, and I just wondered, and I frankly don't know the answer to the question, but I wondered. Our courts changed in composition, and I wondered, would they have made that argument a year ago or 2 years ago, or are they tailoring that argument to fit the perspectives that they think a majority of justices on the court have? So I can see how that would be valuable.
I mean, my hope is that what excellent lawyers are doing every day is thinking about, how do I win this case, right? I mean, this is a client-focused profession. You're looking at your matter, you're looking at the case, you want to win. That's what your client hired you to do. And in a case that has some sort of either jurisprudential or political bent to it, you have to be thinking, you have to be counting votes. You have to be thinking, what is my strategy to get to 2 votes on the Court of Appeals, or 4 votes, or 5 votes, depending on the court. Of course, lawyers are thinking that way, and it would be malpractice almost to sit down and just write a brief with whatever you think. You've got to be targeting it to the audience, and you can't. I just don't see any way to do that if you're sitting in an echo chamber at a firm with a group of people who all think the same thing.
So, what's your advice for? And this is obviously closely related to what we've just been talking about, but what's your advice for law students, lawyers who are looking to switch jobs, about whether to let their prospective employers know about their political views or their judicial philosophy?
I think the first rule is know your audience. Applying for a job at the Institute for Justice is a lot different than trying to go with a big firm. If you want a job with an organization that does advocacy work, showing that you have an interest in that type of advocacy work, that type of policy, I think is very helpful. If you're going for a more neutral organization, they're probably looking to see whether, if they're not looking at whether you're all over social media on political issues, they're looking at whether you're going to be a good member of the team and will be a top-notch lawyer for them.
I mean, I'd have to agree. I think it depends on where you're going. If you're looking for another law firm, I'd be mindful of putting too many indications that you're conservative for many of the reasons we discussed. And I was just thinking of an experience I had coming out of law school, and I had an interview with a very well-known conservative lawyer in the area. And I had on my resume that I was a Blackstone fellow. And I knew the audience, and the advice I got from that attorney was like, don't put that on your resume. And he was dead serious. And I was like, but I knew you. And he's like, yeah, but you don't know if I'm going to forward this to someone. Like, that there are people who are not going to be pleased with that, and you don't know where this is going to go. And that just struck me like, okay, even if you know your audience, you still want to be cautious in some ways. And so to the extent you think signaling that you're a conservative is valuable going forward, I might not do it on a piece of paper. I typically would recommend doing it through relationships, right? Like, there are people in this room who, if you're a young attorney, have been there before and they're eager to lend a hand. And so find out who they know in these law firms you want to talk to, have conversations, build relationships, and to the extent your political bent matters, the right people will know, and it doesn't have to be on a piece of paper. And so that kind of mitigates the risk that it could go against you the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, this is a small legal market. It doesn't take, I know law students might not feel that way. You look around the room and you feel like you don't know anybody. But once you've been doing this for a while, you do start to see the same people, you hear the same names. It's not that hard to build out a network of people where you're one or two people away from anybody you want to know. And building out that network and just ask the question. This isn't kind of a shot in the dark situation. Find whatever that profession or career or move that you want to make is. You should be able to find somebody who knows what your strategy should be to get that job.
So what if you've had the misfortune to clerk for a conservative judge?
It's too late. You're out.
So what I told one of my law clerks who just went actually to my old law firm, I said, if you need to say something negative about me to help your job prospects, feel free to do that. That's okay. So is it? But in all seriousness, clerking has traditionally been something that has been a real plus for applicants. Is it still that way? Is it still that way even if the person clerked for someone who's deemed to be conservative or, for that matter, liberal, whatever?
So I'll start and kind of build off what Matt said. I think clerking, regardless of the judicial philosophy of the judge you work for, is always valuable and always seen as something a law firm wants. And it's for two reasons. One is the one Matt discussed, which is the reality is, as advocates, we know that people come to cases with certain ways they look at issues. And so you want a diversity of views informing the points you're going to be making to the judges you're going to be talking to. But second, regardless of the judicial philosophy of the judge you work for, you know what happens in chambers. You know what a good brief is. You know what goes into an order. And so they don't care. I mean, when I was recruiting for Brooks Pierce, I didn't care what judge you worked for. The fact that you worked for a judge was something that was very valuable to us and something that we would always look for. And so to the extent you might be worried that the political leanings of your judge might be unattractive, trust me, it is greatly outweighed by the simple fact that you worked for a judge.
I agree 100%. I think that's right.
Concur?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Even for Justice Allen.
Even for Justice Allen. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about law firm culture. When we started, I mentioned that my perception is that there's been sort of a shift maybe over the last decade. So what do you think? I mean, in the time that you've been in the legal profession, have you seen a shift in the extent to which attorneys care about whether their colleagues are, we're talking about conservatives, but conservatives, have you seen that? At my old firm, they used to tell me I was the token conservative, and I never minded that. But what do you think?
I mean, I think there has been a shift. I think you see it with the rise of like conservative boutiques. Like, I don't think there would be the felt need for conservative boutiques if there wasn't both a client base and, people who are sort of refugees from law firms where they didn't feel like they were able to pursue the kind of practice that they wanted. I think that you see it in a move away from, like, if you're looking at Supreme Court cases and you're looking at amicus briefs, like, especially in like hot topic cases, like the biggest law firms will only file on one side. Like, I challenge you to look at like the big like social issue cases and find like a big law firm's name on the like conservative side. It just won't be there. And I think that you've seen some high profile examples of partners, leaving firms over political differences. I think there was that case, it was in the New York Times after Dobbs, maybe from Hogan, where like a share partner said, actually, I agree with Dobbs. And she was like forced out because she, created such trauma for the people on the phone, apparently, by saying that. I mean, you can read the article herself. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but that's like certainly a data point that like someone who had been successful for so long felt the need to leave. You've obviously seen high profile departures of like law firm partners. Obviously, Paul Clement and Aaron Murphy left Kirkland and Ellis over Kirkland's, desire for them to stop representing their gun clients. You see, there are sort of legion examples of this. Obviously, Paul Clement originally left King and Spalding over the DOMA case, so he has experience in this. But I think when you see that trend and the rise of conservative boutiques, I think it does suggest that there is less tolerance of views across the political spectrum in at least some firms.
Yeah. So, this is really interesting. I don't want to be pessimistic, but as just thinking about what was just being said, there seem to be kind of maybe 4 factors at play that are going on right now, which could suggest maybe a major change in how this plays out in law firms. I mean, one, you have a number of prominent conservatives leaving major law firms, which means if there was an advocate on management or further above, they're no longer there because they've left to start their own shop. 2, I do think the atmosphere at law school is very different than it was a decade ago, and so that younger generation is now moving into law firms. 3, the current management in law firms, at Brooks Pierce, 50s and 60s, right? And so to the extent they weren't conservative, they were certainly they didn't have maybe the same level of zeal in terms of their liberal opinions. And so there was a moderating factor at the top. And then the third is, the political activism of companies. I mean, we're talking about business law firms, right? You might find yourself at a firm that fully supports your conservative beliefs, but it has a number of large clients who are liberal, and like, we will not hire a law firm that does that type of work, which means, hey, we might be fully supportive of your beliefs, but there's a bottom line, and we have to be mindful of that. And there was at least 1 or 2 situations at Brooks Pierce where we had conversations about that, where they were supportive of me doing the work, but there were identified clients who, there was a concern that they would leave the firm. And so it was a business decision so much as a political decision. And that's just kind of the reality of being at these large law firms. And so, and I say that in a way of maybe a defense of some of these large law firms. I don't think they're necessarily hostile to conservatives. It might just be the culture that we're operating in now.
Just speaking on my own experience, I am at a large law firm. We do conservative political work. We've got a management team that is litigation based and believes that every litigant deserves representation. And when we came on board and brought some of the conservative cases to the firm's response was great. Now, understand that in Florida, we're on the other side on some of these things. So, we may have to be careful about that. We're not a Republican firm. We're a law firm that does good work, that some of our cases happen to be political. Some of our cases happen to be controversial because that's what lawyers do. I think we've gotten away from that some over the last 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, so it does seem that the ethic of you represent your client, you do what's best for that client, you don't necessarily have to agree with that client, that's sort of eroded. And Craig, you touched, I think, a little bit on some of the causes, but maybe we can explore that a little more. What has led to this shift that we've seen in law firm culture, in your view?
This is such a tricky one. I think John's description of kind of playing up the geographic diversity and being able to take different positions in different jurisdictions that's the gold standard. That's the dream. It can be tricky. I think it can be really tricky on certain issues. And to some extent, we can't just lump all social and political and jurisprudential issues together because they're different, right? Just to harken back to the employment example, right? How many firms take employee side litigation and employer side litigation? you kind of can't. There's just this view out there that you can't do that. You got to pick one or the other. And it's not necessarily an ethical conflict. It's that classic issue or business type conflict. And I think there's a perception that some of the social issues in particular, the hot button social issues, that a firm doesn't want to take both sides of that kind of case. So I know that at our firm, we've had folks who wanted to take a position or file an amicus brief in any high profile case like Dobbs, for example. And whether it's on either side, and I think that my recollection is that the firm said, great, go do it, but do it under your own name and not under the firm name, for I think some of the reasons that Craig raises, right? I mean, there's an expectation, I think, that firms won't be out there. There are certain positions that I think would alienate a firm with certain clients. That's just true. And I don't know what's causing it. I don't know if it's that, maybe it's that client corporations are paying more attention to what their firms are doing out there and that it's more public, right? It's not the days of filing a piece of paper in a courthouse that no one doesn't see the light of day nationally. Those days are gone. And when you file something, the Law 360s of the world are going to know if you've taken some position. It can be national news. So maybe that's what it is just the ability to have information be shared nationally so much faster, driving this on a client level.
And you never know what's going to go viral.
You never know. Such as this great story of someone saying one thing on a phone call and getting run out of a firm.
Anybody else have any thoughts on causes? So, not to venture into heresy, but are conservatives part of the problem? That is activism. I'm just thinking back to, when I was practicing, and so I was in education law. We represented school districts around the state, and some of them had Republican majorities, some of them had Democrat majorities, some of them shifted majorities. And so, for example, in Wake County, the school board, Wake County's school assignment measures often provoke a lot of dissatisfaction. And the board went from a Democrat majority board to a Republican majority board, and then sort of changed its position on that. And there was a federal Title VI investigation going. And so, the firm changed position with the client. The firm was able to represent clients of different parties, or clients that had different political views, positions. Are we letting too much politics into the practice of law?
We are professionals, and as professionals, we're supposed to hold ourselves to a higher standard, not just in making our presentations to the court, not just in how we deal with our clients, but also in how we deal with each other. And I think part of the problem has been, in this age of increased polarization, some lawyers are allowing the heated nature of politics to fray their relationships with their fellow colleagues. And that's something that we as professionals should be intentional about not allowing to continue to happen.
Yeah, I do think as a conservative, I often feel I'm the victim of a cancel culture. And so I am always mindful to not replicate that towards a colleague who might be a liberal, if somebody's expressing a liberal view, because I think that just feeds the problem that we're seeing, which is an intolerance of the possibility of disagreement on important issues. And so I think we might subconsciously, just being humans, right, just being broken individuals, might have a similar knee-jerk reaction to try to strike back because we feel like we've been treated unfairly. And so I think conservatives may be part of the problem, maybe not the initial cause, but might not be feeding it. And so it's something for all of us to be mindful of in terms of how we work with colleagues in our firms. But I will say, going to John's point about the professionalism, John and I are probably unique in the sense that we actually do political work. Like we have political clients. We represent politicians. Okay. So my politics when I was at Brooks Pierce was known because I would bring in matters on behalf of Republican senators or House representatives. For like 95% of the attorneys at Brooks Pierce, politics didn't matter one lick, and you didn't know where people stood. There's a small contingency who actually did that work, and it mattered because you would know, hey, I'm not going to call Jim Phillips to help me on one of my clients. And he wasn't going to call me to help him with the governor. And so there was this really small universe of people where their political leanings was known and it mattered. And even then, to the extent the case wasn't related to politics, I worked with those partners and attorneys all the time on different matters because politics didn't matter. And the one thing that really surprised me is the collegiality and the discourse I was able to have with the other attorneys who were working in that space was so, we were friends and we could gently, and it might have just been the unique nature of the friends I had there, we could gently nudge each other and make kind of polite, soft jokes at each other's expense. And it was always done tastefully because I think we knew like, hey, we're professionals, we're in the game in the political realm. I did find that there were some other colleagues I had at my firm who would make kind of unsolicited comments to me, like at the start of a call. And it was just like, I didn't say this, it was like, where's this coming from? And somebody pointed out that it was always the individuals, it was always the attorneys who weren't actually engaged in that field, who for whatever reason felt the need to kind of just nudge me or give me a little blow in terms of whatever, the General Assembly might have done that they didn't like. And so I did, it was interesting, like the people who are closer to the actual kind of political work worked better together in that field than people who kind of interacted with me otherwise. And I will add that I have like one or two anecdotes of somebody making a snarky comment about Medicare on a call. And it's just like, we're talking about a non-compete. Why in the world are you telling me about Medicare?
Because you were responsible.
I was, yes.
So what do you, and Matthew, I'll be particularly interested to hear what you think about this, but what do you think law firms can do to sort of counteract this not just perception, but I think oftentimes reality that lawyers who openly express conservative viewpoints, the expression of those viewpoints isn't welcome?
It is really, this is such a sticky wicket. I think that many people, I think like Craig says, many people, they don't want to talk about any of this stuff at all, ever, right? That's the majority of folks. They don't want to talk about it. They just want to do their job and focus on client needs. They don't want to talk about politics, period. And I think it's okay to have offices where people feel like politics is not something we talk about here. If it's not part of the culture in that office, so be it. In offices where it is part of the culture, I think that what you can do at a firm level is tricky. For a really big firm, each office kind of has its own culture. This is kind of what John was saying. You might have not just in the cases you take, but also just the vibe in the office. My firm, right, we've got 30 offices. We've got offices in the Northeast and the West Coast. And of course, our Smith Moore firm that merged in is Southern offices. And so are there political differences? Could you put your thumb on political differences among the offices? I'm going to venture to say that our New York office and our Greenville, South Carolina office have some kind of the average person's political views are not the same. I'm just going to throw that out there as a wild guess. But I think it's fine. I think that firms can try and create this kind of big tent atmosphere where folks can get together and talk if they want to. But again, it's really up to everybody to try and read the room, right? If you're in an office where people don't want to talk about politics, don't talk about politics, whatever your views are.
Right. Got anything?
I think it goes back to the professionalism of being a lawyer and, treating other people the way that you want to be treated. It's a job too, right? Like we're going there to pay our mortgage in a lot of ways. And so you don't want to do something that jeopardizes that. Know your audience. But if it's, and know the fit, if you're at a place where you're working and you're extremely unhappy because you can't do 2 or 3 things that are important to you, be honest with yourself about it. And, if there are places that may be a better fit for you, look around. I mean, the job market isn't easy, but it's out there. And there are places, there are different organizations and different law firms that offer different atmospheres in which to work. It's not easy, but at the same point in time, we are professionals, and we should try and use every tool that we've got.
So this next question might seem a little strange, but at your firms or at the chamber, do you think that your colleagues, if you had a colleague who wanted to hang a portrait of Washington or Jefferson, or since we're talking about the Federalist Society, Madison, in his or her office, that person would feel comfortable doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I can say yes. I mean, I think we've got one of our paralegals who has a wall devoted to Justice Ginsburg, and different lawyers in our office have different sort of historical things. So I don't think I don't think anybody would look askance at that.
Yeah, I don't see any issue.
Yeah, I mean, most of us have our kids on our walls, but if you really wanted to put Jefferson, or, I mean, you might get a little bit of teased if it was Jefferson, but if you put like Washington or Madison up, we'd be like, okay, we have our kids, but
Right.
good for you.
Okay, we've talked some about clients. Let's spend a few more minutes on that. So some of you do political work. How do you leverage your political views to develop business?
So Justice Allen gave us an outline of some of these questions before, and I looked at this, and I've actually been thinking about this for a little while. And looking back, I really feel like client development for the political work that I do really began in law school. And with the network of people that I built both within the Federalist Society and my other classmates, I've maintained a lot of those ties over the years and tried to build a practice where I'm not known as a Republican lawyer or a conservative lawyer. I just have tried to be a good lawyer and be known as a good lawyer and network with people as someone who will try and help others and help their clients solve problems. And then I've gone to events like this, Federalist Society, RNLA, other work, in order to build the conservative network, because that's something I'm interested in. And the work has ended up coming from a lot of those relationships. When you really try and help other people out, because I mean, it's really what we are as lawyers. We're problem solvers for our clients. And if you do a good job at it and you get a reputation as somebody who can do that, I think clients will ultimately follow that.
Yeah. So similar to what John said, but maybe I'll express it a little differently. I've never gone about trying to leverage my political beliefs to get a client. It's quite the opposite. I've always focused first and foremost on being a really good litigator. And I chose a law firm that was full of, I thought, really good litigators. I learned a lot. And I happened, just through other work at the firm, to dabble in some political work and enjoyed it and wanted to do more. And I found I was able to do more because I was first and foremost a litigator, right? I wasn't a political lawyer, and that's what they were looking for, right? These were lawsuits, right? They wanted the same services that my Fortune 100 companies were getting in the courtroom, and that's what they were hiring me for. And so I never really tried to leverage my political belief to the opposite. To the extent I'm seeking political work, I'm trying to leverage my litigation experience, saying like, this is why John and his team gets hired. Like, we're experienced litigators. And to be honest, I'm curious what John's going to say, but any given year, I do political work, but it's rare that it's more than like 20 or 25% of my work in a year. And I kind of like it that way. And the reality is we're in North Carolina. I mean, if you want it to be a full book of business, you probably need to go to DC. And so you're going to have your bread and butter work, which for me is litigation. I love litigation, and I just try to leverage the litigation skills to the extent I have an opportunity to work in the political field.
Yeah, I mean, right now my split on political work is maybe 10 or 15%. It ebbs and flows, but I've never been 100% political work. I've never been close to 100% of political work. That would terrify me because of the winds of political change can blow. I mean, those of us that lived through 2010 can see how things can change very quickly. So
I've always had just the opposite strategy, and hopefully the contrast is interesting. I'm assiduously apolitical as on social media, with clients. I just don't get into the topic, and I do it on purpose. That's my strategy, right? This is my business strategy, is to have clients think that I just agree with 100% of what they say, unless it's a bad litigation strategy, then I'll fade back. But the reality of private practice, especially for younger folks in the room, your interactions with your clients are personal. They get personal, right? I mean, if you're a litigator, you're going to be in a mediation. Let's go with mediation. If you're in a mediation with your client, that's basically just 10 hours of sitting there with nothing to do while the mediator's in the other room doing who knows what, right? And you're sitting there and there's only so much you can talk about your kids. I mean, your clients are going to talk about current events. They're going to talk about their politics. And my strategy on all of that is I am educated enough on the things that different people think that I hope I can carry an intelligent conversation, maybe not for 10 hours, but for a shorter period of time with whatever my clients think. And my strategy is to I do not want to have a reputation as being a firebrand on any issue at all that's controversial out there. That's my business strategy. I don't want to do that personally. And I'm aware, I mean, I'll be as vague as possible so as not to name names, but I'm aware of a very conservative client who fired their law firm because their law firm was out, they were Facebook friends, and they're on Facebook, just personal, right? Personal Facebook, just, going, the law firm folks were putting out all kinds of progressive opinions and in a really caustic kind of way. And the client fired them in large part because of that. So for me, that's all I need to know. I'm not going to go on Facebook. I don't even have a Facebook page, but I'm not going to go on Facebook and run my mouth. That's not my strategy. But I totally get, and actually I'm fascinated to hear what John and Craig are saying, that you're not out there cultivating a viewpoint to develop that business. It just kind of comes. That's fascinating. That's actually not what I thought happened. I thought that getting those political cases was something that you do by cultivating that kind of public image of having a viewpoint. I'm surprised to hear that.
No, I think I would get, if I was out on social media, posting 18 thoughts a day about random conservative things, I'm quite confident I would have much less work, because then, and this is my personal view, if you do things like that, you as the lawyer are putting the spotlight on you as opposed to the work you're doing for your client. Like, everything that we do should be to advance our client's interests. And that type of social media presence, again, this is my opinion, but I think that can be toxic in so many ways.
Yeah, and I'm not on social media. I mean, I don't really like social media. I'm considering asking the Federalist Society to take down my photo and my bio that they somehow put up on the website. I'm kind of like Ron Swanson on Parks and Rec. So
I've done nothing to promote. You have no friends, Craig. I don't know how that happened.
That's right.
So it sounds like that what you're saying, John and Craig, is that the political work you do is really the outgrowth of the relationships you've cultivated and the professionalism that you've shown, and it really isn't about projecting a particular political image. Is that fair?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I might be thinking too highly of my abilities as a lawyer, but that's what I've hoped, is I've proven myself to be a good, trusted counselor and willing to do that type of work. And so that's why my name's come up to the people who need such an attorney.
So we're closing in on our last few minutes, but in thinking about my practice, so I was in education law for about 7 years. No school board member with whom I worked could have told you what my political views were. And I thought that was important because I wanted them to feel like they could rely on me to be a professional who would exercise my best judgment and untainted by whatever personal, views I had. But it seems like I think that the issues that we're seeing in the legal profession are a result to a large degree of issues we're seeing in the culture. And nowadays it seems that people who are, when you have politically active clients, that they almost, or in many cases do, insist on having an attorney who they think is sympathetic to their view, instead of just saying, they don't have confidence that an attorney who may not share their view, but who's an outstanding lawyer, would go in and argue or advocate for them zealously. What does that tell us, if that's accurate? And I think it is.
I think that's 100% accurate, and not just on the political side. I mean, if you're on several calls with your client and they keep bringing up the kind of narrative or story of how they were harmed or injured in a case, and you never parrot back like, you're right, this isn't fair, we're going to fight for you. Clients want to hear that. They need to hear that you believe them. And in the political sphere, I can't imagine a political case would be any different. That you'd have to be able to express to your client that you're not just advocating because it's your job, but that you do believe that there's a wrong here that needs to be righted.
Does that say something, though, that people feel like I need a lawyer who shares my sense of outrage, or is that a positive thing or a negative thing?
I think that's the human condition. Yeah. I don't really think that's like I think everyone, when you pick your advocate, you want somebody who you feel like really is going to be your advocate, right? And I think people feel a connection, with someone who shares their political beliefs, in the same way that you might feel a connection and want to hire someone who went to your alma mater, or, something like that. I don't think it's necessarily they don't trust the other side. I think it's just about drawing connections with other human beings, and that's what we as humans do, try to connect with each other. I mean, I'm in a unique position because I'm not in private practice. I practice at the Litigation Center for the U.S. Chamber. So my client is the chamber, but in essence, my client is all our members, right? Because we're a member services organization. And so we bring lawsuits on behalf of our members. And I talk to members in all industries, many of whom would know, I do not share their views. My resume marks me as I am. If you looked at my resume, you would be like, okay. So you know what you're getting. And yet, I'm able to make connections with them because, they understand that I, as an attorney, care about what their issue is and how can I best serve their interests. And I think as people sort of develop that relationship, it does, they develop that trust. Maybe I'm too optimistic about that, but I do think that people, they're just looking for connections, and lawyers often feel like some strange world, especially if you're just a Joe Schmo client. This is your one experience with the legal profession. So of course you're going to want someone who goes to your church, or maybe who went to your school, or, their kids go to your kid's elementary school. You feel like I can trust you because you're not so different from me after all.
Well, you should know that one thing I was known for at the School of Government was telling bad jokes. I would start my classes with a few dad jokes. It was my way of apologizing to people for what I was about to do to them. So I brought a list of jokes with me today, just in case our discussion petered off, but it hasn't. So you'll be spared those jokes, but they were horrible. In fact, I wanted to tell you a joke about time travel, but you didn't like it. I think that's about the quality. we have just a few minutes for questions or maybe testimonials if you need to bear witness. Yes, sir.
I have my own testimony. I spent over 30 years in academia teaching chemistry. My job was to teach chemistry. It wasn't to talk about my Christian faith, and it wasn't to talk about politics. And I think all you who are law students need to understand that your job, particularly if you're Christians, is to be lights in dark places, to be genuine, to be real, and realize that your future is in God's hands, that He will put you where you're best needed for your clients. Because I've seen over the 30 years that I've been teaching, I'm now retired, that basically God had me go to each of these places, secular schools. I could never get into Christian ones for some odd reason, but I think there's a parable about that, about the fact that I was supposed to be a light in a dark place. That basically you as lawyers, particularly if you look at Psalm 119, where it talks about, every verse talks about the law, you're trying to hold up a standard regarding what people can trust and depend on. And it's your job to be that standard in the real world, be genuine, be trustworthy, and to be different. And it doesn't matter whether you're in academia, like I was over 30 years. I have a Master of Divinity degree. I also have a Master's in Polymer Science and PhD, okay? I was hired by Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, set up by the president of Kazakhstan, President Nazarbayev. And I didn't hide the fact that I had an MDiv. And when I went there, I didn't hide the fact that I was a Christian, but I taught chemistry. Okay. And my students that appreciated me appreciated it. And some of my employers may not have liked the way I was doing it, but it didn't matter because I was there for my students. Well, you're there for your clients to look out for their interests and such like that because they're not qualified to represent themselves necessarily. And I want to encourage all you young people, whatever your ages are, 40s, 50s, whatever, that God has your future played out for you. And if you can't get a job certain place, you're better off not there. If you get fired and have to move on, you're better at the new place. People appreciate where you go to the next place because I've had miraculous things about getting hired for a chemistry position. I came here to teach at North Carolina, UNC Pembroke. I was offered the position the week before Christmas in 2004. I was asked to say, can you start in 2 weeks? Well, God brought me here for a reason. Okay. And I want you all to understand that, particularly those who are conservative. If you're in a more liberal law firm, be yourself, be a good lawyer, be genuine. That's the best thing you have to offer them. And if you get fired for it, so what? Someone else will appreciate you better. So that's my own testimony. And I think it applies to the law as well as academia. And I have no regrets for all the 30 years I spent. I had a lot of adventures. And from another perspective, tenure is overrated in academia. And I think partnership is overrated too. Because if you get stuck in a place where it changes over the years and you're stuck there, it can get very boring, isolated, and everything else. You never get the good cases anymore, whatever else. And I think in some respects, I think we need to be brave, standing up for what's right, and truly be yourselves and let God use you where you are, and then move you on to somewhere else. So.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes, Justice Barringer. I hope I'm not in trouble.
When I was a very young lawyer, only out of school for a few years, I'd left a big firm, joined my husband's firm he and I built. Got a phone call one day from an older farmer who was looking for a lawyer. And so I picked up the phone. I said, "This is Tamara Barringer. How may I help you?" And silence on the other end. And he said, "Do you know any male lawyers?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, I don't want a woman lawyer." And he said, "Can you send me to a male lawyer?" And I said, "Well, you can call the North Carolina Lawyer Referral Service. Good day, sir." And I hung up. Well, about 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. I pick it up, and it's the same gentleman. And I said, "Sir," I said, "why are you calling me back? The last time I checked, I'm still a woman. I'm still that lady lawyer you don't want." He said, "Well, my wife made me call you back." Fast forward 20 years, when I'm closing down my law practice, he's still one of my clients. And I contacted him, told him that I was going to be referring him to someone else, or did he have someone he wanted to go to, or how did he want to manage this transition? He wrote me the nicest letter, and he said, "I'm not willing to get another lawyer." In thinking about that, the moral of the story is that gentleman believed I was his shero. I was the hero for him. And from that, every client I took on, if I did not believe that I could be that hero, that I could be that person that they counted on, then I wasn't the right lawyer for them and they weren't my right client. And so keep that in mind, that they want someone who is in their corner and will be with them for the 20 years or however long the situation lasts.
So my perhaps main takeaway is be a great lawyer. Focus on that and focus on doing what's best for your clients. I want to thank the Triangle chapter of the Federalist Society. I want to thank all the volunteers who have made this possible, and I want to thank the members of our panel. Thank you very much.